Welcome to another podcast of the Riffle series. The Riffle podcast series brought to you by 10 Leaves. Today, we are diving deep into, well, the engine room of finance in the Middle East, the Abu Dhabi Global Market, or ADGM. If you look at the landscape of international financial centers, ADGM really stands out. It's already the MENA region's largest IFC. We're talking huge numbers here. Over 11,100 active licenses as of mid-2025. Just phenomenal growth.
Absolutely. And, that kind of rapid high-stakes growth, it needs an equally strong regulatory foundation. That's why our deep dive today is all about the ADGM Registration Authorities, the RA's new rulebook, the Administrative Regulations 2025.
Yeah, and this isn't just tweaking a few rules here and there. The materials we looked at call this a root and branch solution. So our mission today is to unpack what these new rules actually mean strategically. They seem to completely reshape how ADGM handles compliance, violations, enforcement. It really feels like it's about safeguarding the whole market's integrity.
Exactly. And what's really key here, I think, is that these regulations are designed to simplify things, to formalize what was maybe a bit more complex before. The whole idea is consistency, making sure ADGM stays attractive globally because its rules are clear and, importantly, rigorously enforced. It's a very deliberate move, really, to foster an environment that, well, empowers future growth by making it easier to deal with bad actors.
Right. So let's unpack the core thinking behind this shift. If you're a company in the ADGM, the RA isn't just, stamping forms. They've laid out these statutory objectives that go way beyond basic registration. What are they actually trying to foster here?
Well, the objectives are pretty clear, and they signal a shift, I'd say, from just reacting to problems to actively preventing them. Key goals are things like fostering an environment where companies are continuously compliant, actively promoting and enhancing the ADGM's integrity and reputation, and making sure all their processes are fair, transparent, and efficient.
Okay, and what about accountability? Where does the sort of enforcement side fit into this integrity-first approach?
Well, that's explicit too. The regulations aim to, and I quote, prevent, detect, and restrain conduct that could harm ADGM's reputation. And they do that by imposing sanctions. It's not just about slapping on fines. It's about making sure people and firms are held accountable by taking enforcement action when rules are broken. It sends a clear message to the market. ADGM means business.
That leads us perfectly into probably the biggest structural change here.
Yeah.
This two-tiered approach to contraventions. Why split offenses up like this? How does this help streamline things?
It's really about proportionality, separating the, let's say, minor administrative slip-ups from the really serious risks. Consistency is key, too.
Yeah.
By having two distinct tiers, Tier 1 and Tier 2, the RA can use a faster process for the smaller stuff and save the heavy machinery, the full investigation and appeal process for breaches that could really impact the market.
Okay, let's start with that faster process then. Tier 1 contraventions. If you're facing a Tier 1 issue, what are we talking about financially? What's the procedure like?
So Tier 1 covers the lower-level stuff. Things categorized as Level 1 or Level 2 on their fine scale. The really crucial point here is the cap. Maximum fine is only USD 2,000. Think, late filings, minor administrative errors, that sort of thing. High volume, low severity.
And the response is quick, too, right? Designed to get it sorted fast.
Exactly. Tier 1 is handled with a financial penalty notice, an FPN. And here's a key detail. The RA does not have to issue a warning notice first. It's basically a pay-up or argue mechanism. You get the FPN, and you have a pretty tight window, just 30 days, to either object by submitting what they call a statement of representations or just pay the fine and move on.
But hang on, a $2,000 cap for a major financial institution, that's barely a rounding error, isn't it? Where does the real deterrent, the real teeth, come in?
Well, that's where Tier 2 bites. This is where the RA shows it's serious about protecting the ADGM's reputation. Tier 2 covers everything categorized as Level 3 or higher. And this is where the potential fines, well, they skyrocket.
Skyrocket is right. You mean up to $54 million. That number alone must make people sit up and take notice.
$54 million US. That's the maximum liability for a single fine in Tier 2. It sends a very clear message. The RA sees serious market integrity failures, systemic problems, or maybe repeated noncompliance as, frankly, an existential threat. And unlike Tier 1, the process here is much more formal. It starts with a warning notice, gives the entity a proper chance to respond with representations before the RA issues a final decision notice.
And it's not just about the money in Tier 2, is it? If they decide you've crossed the line, the RA has a whole arsenal of tools beyond just hitting your bank account.
Oh, absolutely. The enforcement actions for Tier 2 are serious, and they can fundamentally threaten your ability to even operate in the ADGM. We're talking about license suspension or restriction for up to a year, maybe outright cancellation of your license. They can issue prohibition orders, stopping individuals from working in ADGM firms, strike off companies entirely, disqualify directors or officers, or issue public censure statements, which is obviously terrible for reputation. It's a very heavy toolkit designed to remove serious threats.
Okay, so the deterrents are definitely there. Now, let's talk about how they uncovered these bigger problems. The new rules seem to really beef up the RA's investigative and information gathering powers. This feels like the core of their regulatory reach.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
This is a big part of the new framework. The regulations broaden who the RA can demand information from. It's not just the company being investigated. They can compel anyone connected, bank officers, managers, agents, even to the ultimate controller, to provide specific information or documents. And they can specify how it needs to be verified or authenticated.
And what if the situation is really complex? Like they need to audit some intricate financial setup.
Good point. They have powers for that too. They can require the company under investigation to appoint what's called a skilled person, someone the RA either nominates or approves to basically produce an expert report on the issue. Plus, the RA can appoint its own investigators to dig into the business's conduct, its state of affairs, or even who owns or controls it. And these investigators, they have real power. They can require people to attend interviews, answer questions under oath, and hand over documents.
Right, and I noticed those interviews are recorded, and the person being interviewed can get a copy or transcript. That seems like a fair check on those powers. But how far do the physical investigation powers go? Can they just walk in?
Well, investigators can enter business premises during normal business hours to inspect and copy information, provided they believe relevant information is held there. Now, if the company doesn't cooperate, or if the RA thinks documents might be hidden, tampered with, or destroyed, they can go to the ADGM courts and get a warrant to actually search the premises and seize documents.
Okay, now we have to talk about something that sounds like it could completely change the game for companies. The non-excuse clause. This seems absolutely critical for anyone in compliance.
Yes, this is potentially huge. It basically knocks out two traditional defenses people might try to use. The regulations explicitly state that it is not a reasonable excuse to refuse to provide information or answer questions just because doing so might incriminate you. And you also can't refuse just because the information is subject to a duty of confidentiality.
Wait, hold on. So the ADGM is essentially saying if the RA asks for regulatory information, you must hand it over, even if it could point to wrongdoing by you or your company, or even if it breaks a confidentiality agreement you have with a client. That massively shifts the power balance towards the regulator, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It really underscores this commitment to transparency and market integrity, arguably placing it above traditional legal protections in this specific regulatory context. The only way out of this obligation is if the information qualifies as a protected item.
And how tight is that definition of protected items? Is it a big loophole?
No, it's extremely narrow. It mainly covers legal professional privilege, so confidential communications between lawyers and their clients for legal advice, and some very specific information related to national security or overall financial stability. Pretty much everything else outside those specific legally defined areas is fair game for the RA's requests.
Wow. Okay, so given these powerful tools, let's switch gears to how things actually get resolved. Beyond that standard Tier 2 process, you mentioned the RA has new ways to sort things out, balancing, I guess, due process with getting things done efficiently.
That's right. For Tier 2 cases that go the distance, there's still a commitment to transparency. When they issue that initial warning notice, the RA generally has to give the person access to the material they relied on to make their case, unless there's a strong public interest reason not to, or it would prejudice someone else, so you can see what you're up against.
And what about these new mechanisms, consent and settlement? They sound a bit like regulatory off-ramps.
That's a good way to put it. The consent process kicks in after a warning notice, but before a final decision notice. Basically, the person can admit they messed up, agree to the proposed penalty or action, and by doing that, they waive their rights to argue further. The settlement process is a bit more flexible. The RA can talk settlement anytime, even before issuing a notice. This usually ends in a formal, legally binding settlement agreement, which might involve admitting wrongdoing. They're definitely designed to save time and resources for everyone, assuming the entity is willing to cooperate and accept the outcome.
Now, what about situations where waiting for even these processes is too slow? What if the market stability is genuinely at risk right now?
Well, they plan for that too. First, there are the supervisory powers under Part 4. These let the RA issue a supervisory notice to impose requirements or even change a license immediately without the full Tier 2 procedure. The grounds are specific, like if a licensed firm isn't meeting its conditions, or if action is needed in the wider interest of the ADGM.
But then there's the really fast-track auction, the ultimate emergency tool, the CEO's exceptional emergency powers.
Exactly. This is the break glass in case of emergency option. And crucially, the CEO cannot delegate these powers. They're reserved for truly exceptional, urgent cases. We're talking about situations where there's a reasonable suspicion of a serious contravention, a real risk of imminent material harm to consumers, businesses, ADGM itself, or even the UAE, or if there's a reasonable likelihood of criminal activity going on.
So the bar is incredibly high, but if it's met, the action is immediate and potentially devastating for the entity involved.
Absolutely. If those serious grounds are met, the CEO can issue an exceptional notice that leads to immediate license suspension or restriction, license cancellation, or prohibition orders against individuals. It's designed to let the RA intervene instantly in a real crisis to stop the damage spreading.
But even with these incredibly fast and powerful decisions, whether it's a quick Tier 1 fine or an immediate CEO suspension, there is still a final check in the system, right? A safety net.
Yes, there is. That safeguard is judicial review. No matter the decision, Tier 1, Tier 2, or even one made under those exceptional emergency powers, the affected person can apply to the ADGM courts for judicial review. Typically, you have 30 days from receiving the final notice to do this. It ensures that even with all these powers, the RA remains accountable under the law.
Okay, so pulling this all together, the Administrative Regulations 2025 really seem to be a major strategic move by the ADGM to sharpen its regulatory focus. You've got this clear division, Tier 1 for the quick fixes on minor issues, Tier 2 backed by that huge $54 million fine potential, and the power to shut businesses down entirely.
Exactly. And we've seen how their reach is extended through those consolidated investigative powers, crucially stripping away traditional excuses like confidentiality or self-incrimination to get the information needed. And importantly, the new CEO's exceptional powers give them the speed to act decisively against imminent threats.
It really feels like these new regulations underline ADGM's commitment to, well, proving that strong, clear regulation isn't a barrier to being an attractive financial center, but actually a core part of the appeal. Integrity and accountability are front and center.
Which kind of leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. Given that these new rules allow the RA to demand potentially self-incriminating information and let the CEO suspend licenses based on the likelihood of harm under exceptional powers, how does this system fundamentally balance that very real need for regulatory speed and effectiveness against the equally important long-term goal of building and maintaining complete public confidence and procedural fairness? It's a fascinating tension, really, and one that will likely shape how this global financial market continues to evolve.